Please take me. I'll do anything, the peasant begged. The prince said, Then marry me. A muddy village square. Shackles clink. A father dragged away in chains. And then one desperate cry that stops the world. What begins as a plea for mercy turns into the most scandalous promise in the kingdom. A prince binding himself to a beggar girl. Nobles whisper. Bells toll. The church doors slam shut that this marriage vow is no fairy tale. Because in the dark halls of the palace, secrets are forged like daggers. A false accusation. A stolen grain. Ledger. And a plot that could destroy them both before the wedding bells ever ring. Will love strong enough to shake the throne survive the lies meant to tear it apart? Or will a peasant's heart be crushed under the weight of a crown? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. Autumn morning dawned cold and dreary. A thick blanket of gray clouds hanging low over the village square. Mud squelched beneath Elena's worn boots as she made her way through the growing crowd, her basket of coarse bread held tight against her chest. The loaves weren't much, darker and heavier than usual after this year's poor wheat harvest, but they were all her family had left to sell. The sudden commotion near the village stocks made her pause. Through the drizzling rain, she saw a sight that stopped her heart. Her father, struggling between two tax collectors, his weather-worn face twisted in pain as they dragged him forward. Please, she heard him rasp, just a little more time. The harvest, the crown's due must be paid, one collector sneered. Yanking harder on her father's arm, around her, villagers gathered in clusters, their voices carrying on the damp air. Poor souls, whispered Mrs. Cooper, the baker's wife. They'll lose everything now. The whole family's ruined, agreed another, shaking her head. After their mother passed, and now this ... Elena's fingers tightened on her basket until her knuckles went white. The bread she carried suddenly felt as heavy as stones. Without conscious thought, she found herself moving forward, her legs trembling but her spine straight. Stop. The word burst from her before she could think better of it. She threw herself in front of the mounted guards, her heart thundering against her ribs. Please, you cannot do this. The guards exchanged annoyed glances, but before they could speak, the clatter of approaching hooves drew everyone's attention. A small party of richly dressed riders entered the square, their horses tack jingling softly in the morning gloom. At their center rode a young man whose bearing marked him instantly as nobility, Prince Adrian himself, out on one of his famous rural inspections. The prince reined his horse to a halt, his keen eyes taking in the scene before him. Elena felt the weight of his gaze, but refused to look away, even as rain trickled down her face and soaked her simple dress. Your Highness, one of the tax collectors began, bowing awkwardly while maintaining his grip on Elena's father. Just dealing with a defaulter. Please, Elena cried out, desperation making her bold beyond all propriety. She dropped to her knees in the mud, no longer caring about dignity. Please take me instead. I'll do anything. A hush fell over the square. Even the rain seemed to pause, suspended in the thick silence that followed her outburst. Elena kept her eyes fixed on the ground, waiting for the sharp rebuke she knew must come for such brazen behavior. Instead, she heard the soft thud of boots hitting mud. Looking up through wet strands of hair, she saw Prince Adrian had dismounted, and now stood before her, his expression grave and thoughtful. Then marry me? The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to grasp, yet impossible to ignore. Elena stared at him, certain she must have misheard. Around them the crowd erupted in gasps and furious whispers. The prince raised his voice, addressing the tax collectors without taking his eyes from Elena's face. Release that man. Immediately. The collectors scrambled to obey, practically dropping Elena's father in their haste. He stumbled forward, confusion written across his features as he looked between his daughter and the Prince Dot, as if in response to the extraordinary moment. The heavy rainfall began to slacken. In the distance, church. Bells started to toll the hour, their mellow voices drifting through the clearing air. Elena remained frozen, mud soaking through her skirts. As she gazed up at Prince Adrian's face, searching for any sign that this was some cruel jest. But his eyes held nothing but seriousness, and something else, a warmth that made her breath catch in her throat. Still, she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Was this truly destiny reaching down to change her life? Or would she wake in a moment to find it all a dream? The prince continued to wait for her response, patient and steady as the village square filled with the sound of bells and whispered amazement. Around them, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what Alina would say to this most impossible of proposals. The carriage wheels creaked against the muddy road as Alina watched the familiar fields of her village fade into the distance. The morning sun barely pierced the autumn mist, casting long shadows across the countryside. Inside the royal carriage, the velvet cushions felt foreign against her rough-spun dress. Her father sat across from her, his weathered hands folded tightly in his lap. "You should not have done this, daughter," he said softly, his voice heavy with worry. "A peasant does not belong among kings. What will become of you in that great stone palace?" Elena reached across and squeezed his hand. "Father, I could not bear to see you in chains. Whatever comes, we must trust in God's plan." The first day's journey passed in nervous silence, broken only by the steady clip-clop of horses' hooves and the occasional call of their mounted escort. As dusk approached, they arrived at a coaching inn, its windows glowing warmly against the gathering darkness in the inn's stable yard. Alina helped carry their modest belongings, refusing the offered assistance of the guards. A young stable boy, noting her gentle manner with the horses, showed her where to find fresh water. The innkeeper's wife, seeing Elena's simple dress and quiet dignity, pressed extra blankets into her hands. "You have kind eyes, child," the woman said, patting Elena's arm. "Whatever brings you to the capital, keep that kindness close." The second day brought them closer to the royal city. The wooded roads gradually gave way to broader thoroughfares, increasingly crowded with merchant carts and noble carriages. Elena's heart quickened as the city's tall spires came into view, their pennants snapping in the wind as they passed through the city gates. The streets buzzed with activity and whispered gossip. "A peasant bride," she heard someone murmur. "The prince has lost his senses," another voice carried across the cobblestones. Elena sat straighter, willing herself not to shrink from the stares and pointing fingers. The royal palace rose before them, its stone walls soaring toward the clouds. Guards in polished armor lined the ceremonial approach, their faces impassive as the carriage rolled to a stop before the great gates. Prince Adrian stood waiting, resplendent in royal blue and silver. Despite the formal set of his shoulders, Elena caught a flash of warmth in his eyes as he stepped forward to help her from the carriage. Behind him, a cluster of courtiers watched with poorly concealed disdain, their silk garments rustling as they whispered behind jeweled fans. "Welcome to your new home, Miss Elena," Adrian said clearly, his voice carrying across the courtyard. He offered a small bow, precise and proper, though the gesture sent ripples of shock through the watching nobility. A stern-faced woman in dark velvet stepped forward. "I will show our guest to her chambers," she said, each word measured carefully. Elena followed the woman through vast corridors, trying not to gape at the tapestries and gleaming suits of armor that lined the walls. Her father had been led to separate quarters, and she felt his absence keenly dot the guest chamber. When they reached it, was modest by palace standards, but grander than anything Elena had known. A single candle burned in a silver holder, casting dancing shadows on the plastered walls. A narrow bed stood in one corner, its linens crisp and white. "Someone will fetch you for the morning meal," the woman said shortly, closing the door with a decisive click. Alone at last, Elena sank to her knees beside the bed. The single candle flame wavered, and she clasped her hands tightly together. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "grant me strength for whatever tomorrow may bring. Help me remember who I am, even in this place of gold and silk. And please," she added, "softly watch over my father." Through the lidded glass window, She could see the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The same stars that shone over her village home, now so far away. The candle burned steadily as she remained kneeling, her prayers rising silently in the growing darkness. Morning sunlight poured through the towering stained glass windows of the palace's great hall, casting jewel-colored patterns across the marble floor. Elena's simple shoes whispered against the polished stone as Prince Adrian led her forward. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she kept her chin lifted, remembering her father's words about dignity being worth more than gold, the dowager. Queen sat like a statue upon her carved wooden chair, her silver-streaked hair arranged perfectly. Beneath a lace cap, her sharp eyes swept over Elena's modest dress, freshly pressed but clearly common, with undisguised disdain. Around the hall, richly dressed nobles gathered in clusters, their whispers rising like angry bees. "Mother," Adrian's voice rang, clear and strong through the hall. "I present to you Elena, daughter of Thomas the miller, my chosen bride." A lady near the front pressed her painted fan to her lips. "Disgrace," she hissed, loud enough for Elena to hear. Others took up the murmur. Common blood in the royal line. Unprecedented ... scandal. The queen's face tightened, her mouth drawing into a thin line. "Your chosen bride," she repeated, each word dripping with ice. "A miller's daughter. How ... Unexpected." Elena dropped into a curtsy, wobbling slightly on the smooth floor. "Your Majesty," she said softly, keeping her eyes downcast as she'd been taught. "Look up, girl," the queen commanded. "If you dare to reach above your station, at least have the courage to face those you wish to join." Elena raised her eyes, meeting the queen's stern gaze. The morning light caught the Latin inscription carved above the doorway behind the royal chair. Without thinking, Elena's lips moved, reading the familiar words. "Veritas et justitia prevalebit." "Truth and justice shall prevail," she translated. Quietly, the hall fell silent. Even the queen's perfect composure cracked for a moment, her eyes widening in genuine surprise. "You read Latin?" A nobleman stepped forward, his jeweled collar catching the light. "Impossible. The common folk can barely write their names." Adrian's hand found Elena's shoulder, squeezing gently. "Perhaps," he said, smile evident in his voice. "We should not be so quick to judge what is possible." The queen recovered swiftly, her face hardening once more. Reading a few words does not make one fit to be queen. She rose from her chair, silk skirts rustling. "If you insist on this unusual choice, then let her prove herself worthy. The royal council meets in 1 week's time. She will present herself there, and we shall see if a miller's daughter can truly grasp the responsibilities of crown and kingdom." "Mother," Adrian protested, stepping forward, "I gave my word. The betrothal will be dissolved if she fails to demonstrate her fitness to rule," the queen cut in sharply. "Unless you wish to throw away generations of royal tradition for a pretty face who can read a doorway." Elena felt the weight of every eye in the hall upon her. Some faces showed curiosity, others contempt, but most revealed the hungry anticipation of those waiting for entertainment. Her fingers twisted in her skirts, but she forced them still. "I accept your Majesty's challenge," she said clearly, though. Her voice shook slightly. The queen's lip curled. "We shall see." She swept from the hall, her followers trailing behind like peacock feathers. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions and veiled insults. When evening finally fell, Elena found herself alone in her chamber, picking at a plate of cold meat and bread. Torches flickered in the courtyards below her window, their light catching the edges of dark stone walls and creating dancing shadows. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching servants scurry between buildings like mice. Somewhere, in those corridors, nobles were surely plotting her downfall. In the villages, news of her betrothal would be spreading like wildfire. Every eye in the kingdom would be watching, waiting to see if love truly could bridge the gap between common and noble. The bread turned to dust in her mouth. Elena set down her fork, unable to eat more. In 1 week, she would face the royal council. In 1 week, she would learn if her chance at happiness would slip through her fingers like morning mist at dawn, crept softly through the palace windows, painting the stone corridors in gentle shades of gold. The quiet morning air filled with the rustle of skirts and murmured conversations as maids hurried about their duties. Elena sat alone in her chamber, fingers nervous smoothing the fabric of her borrowed dress when a firm knock echoed against her door. "Enter," she called, standing quickly. Lady Beatrice swept into the room with grace, her silver-touched dark hair arranged neatly beneath a lace cap. Her warm brown eyes assessed Elena with maternal concern. "My dear, I am Lady Beatrice, Adrian's aunt. I've come to offer my guidance in these trying days ahead." Elena dropped into an awkward curtsy, making Lady Beatrice smile. "Oh, we shall work on that first. Come, child. We have much to accomplish before the council meets. Over the next hours." Lady Beatrice proved to be both patient teacher and steadfast ally. In a quiet reception room, she demonstrated the proper depth of curtsy for each rank of nobility. Remember 3 finger widths of skirt for a duke, 2 for an earl, and never raise your eyes until bid to do so. Elena practiced until her knees ached, but determination kept her going. When she stumbled, Lady Beatrice steadied her with a gentle hand. "You have natural grace, dear. We need only polish it." The lessons continued through the morning. Elena learned the complex forms of address, committing to memory the proper ways to speak to those above her station. "Your grace for?" "A duke or duchess," Lady Beatrice instructed. "My lord or my lady for lesser nobles. And always wait to be addressed before speaking." When the kitchen maid brought their midday meal, Elena thanked her by name and asked after her family. The maid's surprised smile lit up her face. Lady Beatrice noticed servants began to linger in Elena's presence, offering small kindnesses, and whispered encouragement. They recognized in her someone who saw their humanity, not just their function. "You have a gift," Lady Beatrice observed, watching Elena help a chambermaid gather dropped linens. "Your kindness will serve you better than any number of perfect curtsies." In the afternoon, they ventured into the palace gardens. Elena practiced walking with a book balanced on her head, learning the measured pace expected of a lady. The autumn air carried the scent of late roses as Lady Beatrice corrected her posture. "Straighten your shoulders, yes, just so. Now glide, don't stride." Prince Adrian found them there, his presence announced by the crunch of gravel beneath his boots. Elena's heart quickened at his approach, though she kept her eyes lowered as she'd been taught. The book wobbled precariously on her head. "Aunt Beatrice," he greeted warmly, then turned to Elena. "How fare your lessons?" "Your Highness," Elena managed, attempting to curtsy without dislodging the book. It slipped, but Adrian caught it with a swift movement. "No need for such formality when we're alone," he said softly. "I would rather see your honest smile than a perfect curtsy." Lady Beatrice watched their interaction with knowing eyes. "She learns quickly, nephew. Her sincerity shines brighter than any practiced manner." "As it should," Adrian replied, his gaze never leaving Elena's face. "Truth, heart matters more than polish of presentation." The days that followed fell into a rhythm of steady instruction. Elena rose early to practice her letters in the library before breaking her fast with Lady Beatrice. Afternoons brought lessons in deportment and palace customs. In the evenings, she would slip into the quiet palace chapel, finding peace in its candlelit solitude. On the 5th evening, as dusk painted the sky in deep purple, Adrian found Elena in a small courtyard. Without ceremony, he pressed a small leather-bound book into her hands. "I thought you might appreciate this more than jewels," he said quietly. Elena's fingers trembled as she opened the Book of Psalms, its pages gilt-edged and beautiful. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching it close to her heart. In that moment, as the evening bells began to toll, she felt truly seen not for who she was becoming, but for who she had always been. The harvest festival transformed the palace courtyard into a swirl of autumn colors. Orange and gold banners snapped in the brisk wind while wagons creaked through the gates, bringing fresh apples, golden squash, and musicians with their instruments, wrapped carefully in wool blankets. The scent of roasting chestnuts and spiced cider drifted through the air. making even the most proper nobles breathe deeply with appreciation. Elena stood near a stone archway, her simple blue dress marking her as different from the silk-clad nobility. But Lady Beatrice's gentle coaching showed in her straight posture and calm demeanor. Remember, Lady Beatrice had whispered that morning, true nobility comes from the heart, not the wardrobe. Go on, Lady Beatrice urged now, giving Elena a warm smile. The people are gathering. Show them who you truly are. Taking a deep breath, Elena stepped into the crowd. She noticed how the nobles drew slightly back, while the common folk cast curious glances her way. A woman carrying a small boy caught her attention. The child was coughing into his sleeve, his face flushed with fever. Poor dear, Elena said. Approaching them, without hesitation, she pulled her fresh linen kerchief from her sleeve. Here, she offered, showing the mother how to wet it with water from a nearby barrel. Press it cool against his forehead. My mother used this trick when I was small. The woman's eyes widened with gratitude. Thank you, miss. You're too kind. To notice us? Every child deserves comfort, Elena replied simply, smoothing the boy's hair as his coughing eased as she moved through the courtyard. Elena noticed a soldier standing apart from the crowd. His empty sleeve was pinned neatly, but his eyes held shadows. She approached him with a gentle smile. Sir, might you tell me which battles you served in? My uncle was a soldier too. The man straightened, pride replacing some of his darkness. 3 campaigns under the old king, miss. Lost my hand at Riverside Ford. Then we owe you our gratitude, Elena said warmly. Would you share your stories? I'd love to hear them. Soon the soldier was speaking animatedly, other veterans gathering to join the conversation. Elena listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she valued their service. When the musicians struck up a lively country dance, village women formed a circle near the well. Elena watched their steps with bright eyes, remembering similar dances from home. Without hesitation, she joined them, following the familiar patterns she'd known since childhood. Make way, someone called. The dancers paused as Prince Adrian strode through the crowd, his fine boots dusty from the courtyard stones. To everyone's amazement, he took Elena's hand. Teach me, he asked with a warm smile. The musicians struck up again, and Elena led Adrian through the simple steps. He stumbled at first, but caught on quickly, laughing at his mistakes. Other couples joined them, nobles and commoners alike, the usual barriers forgotten in the joy of the dance. Look how they watch you, Adrian murmured as they turned. Indeed. Elena saw nobles whispering behind their fans, but their expressions held more thoughtfulness than scorn. Meanwhile, the common folk beamed with approval, seeing their prince dancing so freely with one of their own as evening painted the sky. Purple. First fireworks burst overhead. Golden sparks rained down, reflecting in Elena's eyes as she stood close to Adrian. The crowd gasped with each colorful explosion. Their faces turned skyward in wonder. I have never felt so free, Adrian whispered, his fingers warm around Elena's hand. The fireworks painted his face in flashes of red and gold, but his eyes never left her face. Elena's heart swelled with something new and precious, hope, as bright as the lights blooming above them. In this moment, with music floating on the wind and Adrian's hand in hers, she could believe that love might truly bridge any divide. The fireworks crackled overhead, each burst seeming to celebrate this perfect moment when a peasant girl and her prince stood together, their hearts beating as one beneath the autumn stars. The morning sun cast long shadows through the palace. Gallery's tall windows as Elena walked beneath portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Her footsteps echoed softly on the marble floor, but another sound made her pause, the harsh whispers of nobles gathered in a shadowy alcove. Did you see how she danced with the common folk? A silk-clad lady muttered, as though she belonged with them still. Indeed, another answered. But what else can one expect from a family of thieves? Elena's heart jumped. She pressed herself against a cool stone column, holding her breath to listen. Oh yes, a third voice drawled. Haven't you heard? Her father was caught stealing grain from the royal storehouse last harvest. The guards have proof. The blood drained from Elena's face. She knew the accusation was false. Her father would sooner starve than steal. But the venom in their voices made her shiver despite the warm morning light. Courtier, in an emerald doublet, noticed her and smiled cruelly. Why, if it isn't our future princess herself? He bowed with exaggerated flourish. Tell us, how does it feel knowing your father is nothing but a common thief? Elena lifted her chin, though her hands trembled. You speak falsehood, sir. My father is an honest man. Honest? The courtier laughed. As honest as winter is warm, fighting back tears. Elena hurried through the corridors until she found Adrian in his study. Sunlight streamed through leaded windows onto scattered papers and maps. Elena? His face softened with concern when he saw her distress. What's wrong? They're saying terrible things about my father, she said, her voice breaking. That he stole from the royal stores, but it isn't true, Adrian. He would never... A sharp knock interrupted them. A page entered, bearing a sealed document on a silver tray. Your Highness, urgent from the Royal Council. Adrian broke the seal and unfolded the paper. His expression darkened as he read. This appears to be a signed confession from your father. Elena, admitting to the theft of grain? What? Elena grabbed the document with trembling fingers. The signature looked real, but she knew it couldn't be. This is a lie. Someone has forged this. Before Adrian could respond, the chamber doors burst open. The Dowager Queen swept in, her gray silk skirts rustling like angry leaves. So, the truth emerges at last, her cold eyes fixed on Elena. A family of thieves, trying to steal not just grain, but a crown. Mother, please, Adrian started, but the Queen cut him off. The evidence is clear. I demand this girl's immediate dismissal from court. We cannot allow such corruption to taint the royal line. Elena's heart pounded. She looked to Adrian, who stood with his fists clenched, conflict written across his features. I will not dismiss her, he said firmly. Not without proof beyond a simple document that could easily be forged. The Queen's lips tightened to a thin line. Then you leave me no choice but to call an emergency session of the Royal Council. They will not look kindly on this situation. After. She swept out. Adrian took Elena's hands in his. I believe you, he said softly, and I will uncover the truth. But it will take time to prove your innocence. Elena nodded, though fear clutched at her throat. What shall I do until then? Stay strong, he whispered. Trust that I will not abandon you. That night, Elena sat alone in her chamber, a single candle casting wavering shadows on the wall. Sleep felt impossible. Every few minutes, footsteps passed her door guards or spies. She wasn't sure which. But their meaning was clear. She was being watched, kept from fleeing like a guilty person might. She touched the letter from her father that she kept hidden in her bodice. His actual handwriting, so different from the forged confession, gave her comfort. But as another set of footsteps echoed in the corridor, she wondered how long even Adrian's protection could shield her from the storm gathering around her. The candle guttered low as she stared into its flame, feeling more alone than she had since that rainy day in the village square. Outside her window, clouds drifted across the moon, and the footsteps continued their relentless patrol. Thunder rumbled outside, the great hall's towering windows as nobles gathered for the emergency council. Candlelight flickered across worried faces while Elena stood before the assembled court, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to their elaborate finery. The Dowager Queen sat rigid on her gilt chair, triumph gleaming in her eyes. My lords and ladies, the Queen's voice cut through the tense silence. We have grave evidence to present. She gestured to Lord Blackwood, who stepped forward with a sheaf of papers, their royal seals glinting in the candlelight. These documents, he proclaimed, prove without doubt that Elena and her father conspired to orchestrate this marriage through deliberate manipulation. His words drew gasps from the gathered nobles. They staged their poverty, arranged the confrontation with tax collectors, all to trap our beloved prince in a common girl's web. Elena's hands trembled, but she kept her chin high. That is not true, your grace. I would never. Silence. The Dowager Queen rose, her silver-streaked hair catching the light. You dare speak without permission? This further proves your lack breeding. She turned to Adrian, who stood rigid beside his mother's throne. My son, surely now you see the danger of this ... association. Adrian stepped forward, his voice steady but strained. Mother, these accusations are baseless. I was there that morning. I saw genuine distress, true nobility of spirit. Your Highness, Lord Chancellor Morton interrupted, his aged face grave. We must speak plainly. Your right to succession could be challenged if you persist in this unfortunate attachment. The noble houses will not accept a peasant queen. Elena felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment. But worse was seeing Adrian's face, torn between duty and heart. She could not bear to be the cause of his ruin. Drawing a deep breath, Elena moved to the center of the hall. Your graces, my lords and ladies. Her voice carried clear and strong, though her heart ached. I will not be the cause of discord in this kingdom. I will not see Prince Adrian's birthright threatened for my sake. She turned to face Adrian directly, willing him to understand. With profound gratitude for your kindness, I hereby release you from any obligation to me. Elena, no. Adrian started forward, but she continued. It is my choice to return home. My father needs me, and I will not compromise my honor or yours by staying where I'm not welcome. She dropped into a perfect curtsy, just as Lady Beatrice had taught her. I bid you all farewell. The journey home seemed endless. Rain drummed steadily on the carriage roof as Elena watched the grand city fade into misty distance. Each mile, marker passed like a weight on her heart, but she did not allow herself to weep. Villages and forests blurred past the windows, the weather matching her mood as they traveled through 3 days of constant drizzle. When they finally reached her village, the familiar sight of thatched roofs and the old church spire brought both comfort and pain. The carriage let her off at her cottage door, where she found their neighbor, Mrs. Collins, tending to her father. Thank heavens you're home, child, the older woman fretted. Your father took ill 2 days past. The fever won't break. Elena rushed to her father's bedside, finding him pale and shivering beneath thin blankets. His eyes fluttered open at her touch. Elena? Is it really you? Yes, father. I'm home. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. And I'm staying, right? Here. Through the long night, she tended him faithfully, brewing herb tea and changing compresses. As dawn's first light crept through their small window, she knelt beside his bed, holding his weathered hand. I'm sorry, Elena, he whispered weakly. Perhaps if I had been a better father, given you more ... No, she interrupted gently, squeezing. His fingers? You gave me something far more precious than riches, or... She smiled through unshed tears. It is better to lose a crown than lose one's soul. Lady Beatrice's fingers traced across yellowed pages as lamplight cast dancing shadows in the palace library. The musty scent of leather-bound volumes filled the air as she methodically examined grain storage records from the past harvest. Something about the numbers hadn't settled right in her mind since Elena's departure 3 days ago. These entries, she murmured, comparing 2 ledgers side by side. They simply cannot be correct. Her keen eyes noticed discrepancies in the quantities. Far more grain had been recorded as received than distributed to the royal stores. Outside, rain drummed against the library's high windows as Beatrice discovered a pattern. The same names appeared repeatedly, all connected to the Dowager Queen's most trusted allies. Lord Blackwood's signature graced several suspicious transfers, each coinciding with missing stores from the very region where Elena's father farmed. Heaven help us, Beatrice whispered, her hand trembling as she uncovered the truth. The noble families had been embezzling grain for months, selling it secretly while blaming shortages on poor peasant management. the very documents used to accuse. Elena's father were cleverly altered copies of these records. Meanwhile, Prince Adrian spurred his horse through the downpour, mud splattering his plain traveler's cloak. He had shed his royal garments, choosing instead the simple attire of a merchant. His heart pounded with each league that brought him closer to Elena's village. The queen's strict orders meant nothing compared to the ache in his chest. The cottage appeared through the gray curtain of rain, smoke curling from its chimney. Adrian dismounted, his boots sinking into the muddy earth as he approached the humble dwelling. Through the window, he could see Elena's silhouette moving in the dim interior. She opened the door at his knock, her face pale with fatigue. "Your Highness," she gasped, quickly glancing around to ensure no one had witnessed his arrival. "Please," he said softly, "just Adrian here." His eyes took in her worn appearance, the shadows beneath her eyes speaking of sleepless nights. "May I enter?" Elena led him inside, where her father lay on a narrow bed near the hearth. The old man's breathing was labored, his face flushed with fever. Adrian watched as Elena tenderly adjusted the blanket covering him. "I have been a coward," Adrian confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have defended you more fiercely, should have seen through the lies sooner." He stepped closer, taking her work-roughened hands in his. "I believe in your innocence, Elena. I always have in my heart. Can you forgive my weakness in the face of court pressure?" Tears welled in Elena's eyes as she looked up at him. "There is nothing to forgive, you're Adrian. You risked everything just by giving me a chance." The intimate moment was interrupted by urgent pounding at the door. A royal messenger stood there, drenched and breathless, clutching a leather satchel to his chest. "Your Highness," he panted, recognizing Adrian despite his common garb. "Lady Beatrice sends these with utmost haste." Inside the satchel lay several scrolls of carefully annotated ledgers. Adrian and Elena bent over them together as the messenger caught his breath by the fire. Each page revealed the careful accounting of Lady Beatrice's investigation proof of the noble family's corruption and the deliberate framing of Elena's father. "The truth," Adrian breathed, his fingers tracing the damning evidence. "At last we have the truth." Elena touched the pages with trembling fingers, her voice barely a whisper. "These will clear my father's name?" "They will do far more than that," Adrian assured her, his eyes bright with purpose. "They will expose those who truly dishonored the crown and prove that worth comes not from titles, but from the content of one's character." The midnight hour struck from the distant village church as they studied the documents by candlelight, hope rekindling in both their hearts. The truth had been unveiled, and with it, the path to justice lay clear before them. In the vast royal council chamber, morning light streamed through tall windows, catching the dust motes that danced between ancient tapestries. Nobles lined the walls in their finest silks and velvets, their whispers echoing off stone walls, as Adrian led Elena and her father through the heavy oak doors. Elena's simple blue dress stood stark against the rich garments surrounding them. Yet she walked with quiet dignity, supporting her father's trembling steps. Lady Beatrice stood near. The great table, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, a stack of leather-bound ledgers before her. Her normally gentle face held steel as she met the Dowager Queen's cold stare across the chamber. "Your Majesties, my lords and ladies," Beatrice's clear voice rang out. "I present evidence that will shine truth upon recent accusations." Her steady hands opened the first ledger. "These records show systematic theft from the royal granaries, not by humble farmers, but by those who held keys to the kingdom's wealth." She began to read dates and numbers, each entry damning in its precision. The gathered nobles shifted uneasily, as familiar names emerged, lords who had pointed fingers at. Elena's family now found themselves named as conspirators. Their faces grew pale as Beatrice revealed false entries, altered numbers, and coins that had lined noble pockets while common folk went hungry. A murmur like distant thunder rolled through the chamber. Elena felt Adrian's hand brush hers briefly, a touch of reassurance as the truth unfurled before them. This is outrageous. The Dowager Queen's voice cracked like ice. You dare accuse noble houses based on common ledgers? I dare speak truth. Your Grace, Beatrice replied, her voice steady. As these records show, Elena's father was merely a convenient scapegoat for those who sought to hide their greed. Prince Adrian stepped forward, his royal blue doublet catching the light. For too long we have allowed birth to blind us to character. Elena showed more nobility in sacrificing her happiness to protect others than those who schemed to destroy. His voice carried to every corner of the chamber. I demand justice, not just for her, but for every subject wronged by those who abused their power. Elena's father, pale but determined, stepped away from her support. Though his legs shook, his voice rang clear. My lords, my ladies, he began, his simple farmer speech cutting through courtly pretense. I have lived honest all my days, asking only to work my land and care for my child. My Elena, his voice caught with pride, her only crime was loving. Her father enough to sacrifice everything for him. She never sought a crown, only justice. Silence fell as all eyes turned to the dais where the old king sat. For months, illness had kept him from full duties, leaving the dowager to rule in his name. Now he stirred, pushing aside the blanket across his knees. His aged face held both wisdom and weariness as he slowly rose to his feet. We've heard much, the king's voice was soft but clear, of nobility and common blood. Yet in my years, I have seen nobility in peasant hovels and dishonor in marble halls. He gestured to Elena. This child showed mercy when faced with cruelty, truth when surrounded by lies. Such virtue needs no noble birth to recommend it. The Dowager Queen swayed, her face ashen as her schemes crumbled. Around the chamber, the nobles who had conspired with her drew back, trying to fade into shadows as guards moved to block the exits. Their disgrace was complete, their whispered plots exposed to harsh daylight. Before the entire assembly, Adrian crossed to Elena and took her hand in his. She lifted her eyes to his, seeing in them the same unwavering faith that had first moved him to stop his horse in a muddy village square. Their fingers intertwined, callous palm against smooth, a bridge between two worlds that love had already joined. What was meant to divide us has only proved why we must be united, Adrian declared, his voice ringing with quiet joy. Elena's heart holds the very nobility this court has forgotten. That true worth lies not in titles, but in the courage to stand for what is right. The great bells of St. Michael's Cathedral rang out across the capital, their joyous peals echoing through narrow streets and grand courtyards alike. The spring morning dawned clear and bright, warming the cobblestones as streams of people made their way toward the chapel. Nobles in their finest silks walked alongside villagers in freshly pressed woolens, all drawn by the historic union about to take place. Sunlight poured through the cathedral's towering stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across stone, floors, and wooden pews. The light painted Elena's simple ivory gown with splashes of color as she stood in the vestibule, her fingers trembling slightly as they gripped her bouquet of wildflowers and roses. Her father, still bearing the pallor of recent illness but with pride brightening his eyes, stood ready to escort her down the aisle inside the cathedral. Prince Adrian waited before the altar, dressed not in the usual overwhelming splendor. Royal ceremony, but in elegantly understated attire that spoke of his new vision for the crown. His deep blue doublet bore only modest gold embroidery, and his expression held the humility of one who had learned that true nobility dwelled in the heart. Rather than in titles, the choir's voices soared to the vaulted ceiling as Elena began her walk. Their Latin hymns filled the sacred space with ethereal beauty, and heads turned to watch her progress. Unlike most royal weddings, where common folk pressed against windows outside, today villagers sat alongside nobles in the pews. Kitchen maids dabbed tears beside duchesses, and stable boys shared hymnals with lords. Elena's father moved slowly, but steadily beside her, each step measured and meaningful. When they reached Adrian, the old farmer's voice was clear and strong. as he gave his blessing, speaking not as a peasant to his prince, but as a father entrusting his beloved daughter to a worthy man. The priest, bearing a royal license that waved the traditional wedding bands for the sake of justice and urgency, led them through their vows. Elena's voice remained steady as she pledged herself to Adrian, while his own words rang with quiet conviction. Their hands joined before the altar, fingers intertwining without regard for the calluses that marked her years of honest labor. What God and crown have joined, the priest proclaimed, let no earthly power divide. Throughout the ceremony, the assembled witnesses, from the highest born to the humblest servant, watched with varying degrees of wonder and approval. Many of the same nobles who had once whispered against Elena now sat in respectful silence, their recent disgrace still fresh in memory. The servants and villagers beamed with undisguised joy, seeing in this union hope for a more just future as evening descended. The celebration moved from cathedral to castle to town square. Villagers feasted at trestle tables laden with bread and meat, while music and laughter filled the air. Candles burned low in their sconces, their warm light touching faces both common and noble with the same gentle glow. On a palace balcony overlooking the festivities, Adrian drew Elena close. Stars had begun to appear in the deepening blue above them, and the sounds of celebration rose from the square below. He leaned near, his words meant for her alone. From this day, no crown weighs heavier than the love we share. Elena lifted her gaze to the star-strewn sky, her heart filled with a peace she had never dared imagine in those desperate days in the village square. Hope, bright as the stars above, illuminated the path ahead, not just for her and Adrian, but for all those whose lives their union would touch. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here where love speaks softly and stays.